social studies, and ironically, he is becoming a nurse anesthetist. My 28-year-old is a twice exceptional child, and for his exceptionality, he deals with severe anxiety and depression. So successes look very different for him. He bathed every day this week, he ate every day this week, and he's taking one college class. So that is, things are looking up for him. So I want you to know that I come from a place of living it as well as studying about it. Now, you're talking about several social emotional issues, perfectionism, anxiety, behavioral manifestations. So many of these are linked right to anxiety. Macbeth, present fears are less than horrible imaginings. And in today's world, we have so many present fears that are very real. So that anxiety comes from not only worrying about what's going on now, but worrying about what possibly could be. I had a nephew that his anxiety stemmed from the fact that he thought he might just float off the ground and leave his parents. Totally irrational, but he was a 5-year-old and had trouble going to sleep at night because of that. So how does anxiety present itself? For my nephew, I mentioned it was not being able to sleep because he was worrying. But sometimes that can come across as withdrawal, crying, tears, anger, lethargy, just kind of cutting out on life, being overwhelmed. The guy in the blue hoodie below, he just can't take it anymore. And then the other man, you see that it's rage, and he's just absolutely overwhelmed with life. So how do we ease those intensities, that anxiety? Well, unhealthily, we will go to alcohol, drugs, video games, those screens to escape the anxiety, isolation, where we just don't deal with things. We do our own thing in our room. Promiscuity can also be a result of a way to deaden that anxiety that kids have, as well as taking very unnecessary, dangerous risks. And those are all things, of course, we don't want our kids doing. And that's why you're here. We want to talk about how do we nip that anxiety in the bud. So before we can talk about those strategies, let's just talk about what is anxiety. Well, it is actually the most common mental illness in the United States out of all of them. It's general, the different types of anxiety. Now, realize that when we say your child is anxious, that does not mean he is diagnosed officially with general anxiety disorder, but you may see symptoms of this. And there's a strong line between that. I just want to point that out. Roughly 19 million adult Americans suffer from anxiety, and we have no idea how many children do. About 20 minutes before I got on the call, I was talking to a teacher in Kentucky, and she relayed to me that she was teaching her 6th grade class. It was a self-contained gifted classroom. And a boy came in totally distraught. He sat down, threw his backpack down, put his hands on his head and said, "I just had a major anxiety attack." Now, the teacher had talked to him privately about anxiety and what to do to put things in perspective and to help him, but he did it in front of the whole class. And there were 12 kids, which is a perfect size class. But and so she started talking to him, and she said, "Well, what did that look like?" And he said, "Oh, I cried." She said, "Oh, I'm so sorry you went through that. Are you feeling better now?" And, he said, "Yes." And so she asked the class, how many of you have ever experienced anything like he's talking about, where that anxiety is just so intense? Every single child raised his or her hand. 6th grade, not being able to deal with life. Nervousness and fear. And that might be fear of real things or of unreal things. And this can lead to very chronic, unremitting fear that just keeps growing. It gets worse and worse. And then it can get a little bit irrational, excessive. There's a sense of dread that the child feels or the person feels, so much so that we see stomach aches, migraines. Oftentimes they're the types of physical ailments that can't be documented clearly. So as parents, we're not quite sure, do you really have a tummy ache, or you just don't want to go to school, or how bad is that headache? But that's one of the examples of that physical manifestation that happens because they're just in such turmoil. Now, realize that this can coexist with other issues as well. Oftentimes, anxiety can lead to depression. Anxiety, perfectionism you will also have anxiety with that because you want to do the very best you can always. Some medications are very effective for folks, and this would be with a clinical diagnosis. Psychotherapy tends to be very beneficial when it comes to anxiety, especially cognitive behavioral therapies. And that's where you're using, you're actually doing specific exercises that will help your brain kind of reprogram when you start feeling anxiety. So it's pretty awful when you look at all the things that anxiety is for kids. So why is it? Why do these children have anxiety? And this is where you might find some things that sound familiar to you. Genetics. The neurodiversity, the neuroanatomy that gifted children have differs not just in cognitive ability, but also in their reactions to the world. As Cheyenne said, they might have more intensities that you saw earlier. And if you're interested in that, you can read about overexcitabilities with Dabrowski, and we can give you information on that if you want it. But that neuroanatomy differs, and that comes from genes, right? Also, if parents have anxiety, then that can be genetically passed on to students. Gifted kids are also asynchronous. And what that means is all parts of them don't develop at the same time. So they can be cognitively way ahead, but still right at grade level when it comes to maturity. So they have all these conflicting parts of themselves, and people treat them differently because they sometimes expect gifted kids to be socially mature, physically mature, those types of things. Sometimes it comes down to child temperament. My son that I mentioned earlier, he banged his head in the crib. That should have been our first sign, but of course I had no idea. Sometimes kids are just born anxious. Oftentimes we can link it to parent disapproval, and that doesn't mean it's real. It's just if the child feels that the parent does not approve. Criticism from parents can also lead to great anxiety as they try harder and harder to meet your expectations. As I mentioned earlier, parental anxiety can lead to child anxiety. So it's really important that you try to model handling anxiety in a positive way. Of course, bullying definitely leads to anxiety. Some of the causes of that are parent actions. For example, inconsistent parenting is extremely confusing to children. Let me give you an example of what that might be. Your rule is you only have 2 books at bedtime, and they're small books, or maybe 2 chapters, you have a set limit of 25 minutes of reading. But one night you decide to let them have more than that. And then the next night you might have them pull way back because you don't really have time and you got to bed late. Well, those inconsistent rules are very confusing to children. Sometimes they're even in question. Okay, is it okay if I do this? I did it last time and got in trouble for it, but then the time before that, I didn't get in trouble for it. So is this something that you want me to do or not want me to do? And a hard one is parental conflict, especially in the age of COVID when we were all under one roof for a very long time. But studies have shown that when parents have arguments in front of their children, and it can be about anything, it doesn't have to be about the child, that causes great anxiety. And part of that is that they're very sensitive and they pick up on other people's emotions. Some of them can be empathic and they actually feel the emotions that the other ones do. And that's very damaging to children. And then also the discussion of adult topics and concepts. And you might be in the kitchen working on dinner and you're whispering, but suddenly the child in the back bedroom can hear what you're saying. Can't hear when you're asking him, face to face something, but zeroes in. And so they tend to take on those problems. Money's tight. Kids are going to know it if you've had quiet conversations somewhere in the house. So especially if you've had conversations in front of them. And then, of course, the elephant in the room. We have huge things going on in the past couple of years, things that are coming to a head. And regardless of your political affiliations, your personal beliefs, your children are aware of things that are going on in the world, extremely aware of it. And if I could say there's a silver lining to COVID, it would be that mental illness is much less taboo than it used to be, because for the first time, I think people were feeling anxiety when they never felt it before, feeling depression when they never felt it before. And so your kids are very aware of what's going on in the world. Sometimes anxiety is necessary, right? Your kids are fighting, you're going to pull them apart, you're going to give them a talking to, right? And that's just all part of parenting. But sometimes we subject our kids to anxiety that's totally unnecessary. You know, the child gets a B on a test and you're talking, well, why did you get a B? I saw you studying. Did you not study and go over your words one more time when we were on the way to school like we talked about? And oftentimes, and sports can be incredibly beneficial for kids, but also incredibly stress-inducing and damaging if done incorrectly. Now, most of those things that we talked about, for example, bullying, that's going to cause anxiety in any child. But there are some unique sources of anxiety in our gifted children. And one of those is social coping. I'll let you read what that says. There are parents who do not talk to their children about being gifted. And that's really frustrating for kids. They know they're different. Of course, they know they're different. And when children find out that there's a reason why, there's this huge sense of relief. I mean, we were just at the National Association for Gifted Children, their conference that was held in Denver. And I say we because several of the folks you're going to be meeting in the breakout rooms were there, as well as Ms. Meadows. So one of the best things about that was being with your tribe, being with your people. And very shy folks will come out of their shells when they're with other folks, in this case, talking about gifted education. So that may be very different from others. If your child were deaf, would you talk to him about his deafness? Sure you would. There are exceptionalities, which means they learn different from the norm. There's a really great NAGC tip sheet that I'll share that information with you near the end of this. And one deals with how to tell your child about being gifted. The big fish, little pond effect is pretty tough. We see this especially around middle school when children have been, they're the big man on campus from their elementary school. And suddenly when they're mixed with middle school kids or junior high kids, they're not necessarily the smartest one there. And that can be a huge source of anxiety and even questioning, who you are as a person if it's not handled well. And hitting the wall, the first time that they don't get something like that causes great anxiety. I thought I was smart. I was supposed to know this stuff. Now, we all know that kids are going to school to learn. But for gifted kids who kind of sailed along and might not have had any challenge until middle school, sometimes high school, it can be very damaging to them. And if you're interested in reading more about this, Carol Dweck is a psychologist who's come up with the term growth mindset. And she has some very interesting writings on that. Let's look at giftedness as a source of anxiety. Heightened sensitivity, and that can be intrapersonal, physical, social. If your child can't stand to have the tags in clothing, if he or she hears the slight metal sound of fluorescent lights, she can't concentrate. Tastes are very unusual, or they have to be a certain texture. All of these are heightened sensitivities of the physical sort. And I mentioned overexcitabilities with Dabrowski a little bit earlier, but if you're interested in reading more about that, I would look into some of his work, and I'm sure that you've got resources there. It's wonderful to have that analytical mind that our gifted children do, who are gifted in intelligence and certain specific academic areas. But that makes them question, makes them evaluate, judge, and that's everything. They can't just turn it off and turn it on. So when they're asking you why, they really want to know why. They're not being disrespectful. When they ask teachers, well, what do you mean by that? And how do you do that? Well, actually, that's not exactly correct. I mean, I remember my son coming home in 4th grade in tears because of the argument it had with his PE teacher over whether tomato is a fruit or a vegetable. And he knew it was a fruit. And so here I'm trying to explain to him when are appropriate times to stand up for what you believe in and when are not. So you talk about anxiety. And this is really tough. And this is true for all children, especially in the age of social media where kids are having all kinds of things done to their faces to be, to have that Instagram look. Self-criticism can be an extreme source of anxiety. And that can come from the heightened sensitivities of knowing you're different from others, of feeling emotions much more intensely than other people do. So what do we do? And this doesn't, remember, it doesn't have to be that your child is clinically diagnosed with anxiety, but when the child is anxious, what do we do? Well, I'm going to start with what we don't do. The first thing we don't do is overreact and assume that this fit that they're having is a deliberate thing they're doing to get out of something. For example, maybe your child has his heart set on watching a certain program and he finds out that he has to go to his cousin's birthday party. And even though he's 8 years old, he's down on the floor screaming and crying. Now, that was something he had his heart set on. And you will look at that perhaps as being defiant, not minding me, but that's somebody, change can be very challenging for people with anxiety. He's not deliberately trying to be bad. He just needs to get past that to go on to the party. This one's tough too, about overreacting in trivial situations, because we do tend to do that, especially in the busy times around the holidays. I think that's especially true because it's hard to tell what is essential and trivial and what isn't sometimes. For example, you ask your child to help with the dishes and he said he will in a minute. 10 minutes go by, he hasn't helped, you remind him, oh, he forgot, and he'll come in, and then maybe it's still 5 minutes after that. And that's frustrating and it's challenging, but for somebody who is already very edgy, there needs to be a calm discussion. And maybe sometimes it's looking them in the eyes and saying, I would like for you to help me with dishes, and you have 2 minutes, and let's set a timer. And did you understand what I said? Yeah, 2 minutes. So that goes off, and that's going to alleviate that problem. This is a big one too. We mentioned that by genetics, kids can get anxiety from their folks, but they also do it by watching their parents have anxiety. And that's almost impossible during COVID. Of course, we're all anxious. Of course we are. But sometimes it's important to talk to other adults. For example, I'll take my same son, and this was as a young adult, he was in his early 20s. We did a dirty Santa on my side of the family where you exchange gifts and you can steal from different people. It's kind of like a white elephant thing. And that side of the family is very competitive. And he got into it and he was through the roof with his anxiety. His legs were shaking. I mean, he actually ended up tearing up some because they were teasing and having fun, but he saw it as great conflict. And so he didn't do it the next year and got a little ribbing because of that. Oh, you don't want to spend the money, blah, blah, blah. So I just took him aside and said, look, it causes him great anxiety. It's not fun for him. So he's not going to do it. And that was the end of that. This is a real hard one too. When our children have great problems, we want to help them, right? We want to help them figure out the problem. If they're crying, we want to talk them down. But we've got to be super careful with this because that child will become an adult who needs to learn how to calm himself, how to self-soothe. So it's totally okay to say, wow, it looks like you have a problem. Let me know if you want to talk about it. Maybe we can brainstorm some things. Your child comes home having a horrible day, for example, and you're going to logically tell him, but there were happy things today too. You did this, this, this. Well, emotions aren't always rational, right? You can't reason through emotions. So your best bet is to let that emotion, let the child have some time by himself, let that emotion even out, and then you can talk. And please don't add fuel to the fire. You know, when the child is upset already, it's not like, look, I told you this and you're doing it. And it just escalates to the point where it's not fun for anybody. And this happens when adults also have anxiety. Nobody intends for it to. But your best bet in an anxious situation is divide, calm down, and then come back to it more rationally. So we've talked about divide, come back to it more rationally. Here are some things that we should be doing. There are so many different things that can help anxiety. And I know sleeping regularly doesn't seem like it helps anxiety, but it does. Eating healthily. For my son, that meant he needed a protein every morning. And there was a great difference in how he handled the world when he had protein in the morning. Activity certainly helps. Caffeine and sugar do not help. Talking with someone that you trust or the child trusts can really help. So does laughter. Journaling. Here's an interesting thing that tends to work well with lots of folks, I think. It works well with me. When you just feel like you are so overwhelmed, and I was, one of your breakout folks was saying all the list of things to do when she got back from the NAGC conference. Well, so you make a list of things that are weighing you down. As you review it, you circle those things that are not in your control. And you're going to be surprised. Well, you circle the things that are within your control. And then you mark through the rest. And you're going to be surprised at the things that are weighing on you, what you have control over. If it's weighing on you that COVID is all throughout the world, can you do anything about that? Well, you can make sure you get your vaccine, or you can make sure you're taking precautions, right? So those things that you do have control over, just write down 1 or 2 realistic steps to take that will ease the feeling of being overwhelmed. Sometimes thinking, what is the worst possible thing that can happen? Can I deal with that? Your child, what's the worst that could happen is he gets an F on a paper, for example. Well, can you deal with that? Probably, right? It's not going to end his life. And if you talk things through rationally, when the person's calm, then he can be able to see that. There are so many relaxation techniques, and that's important because some things work for different people. And I suggest that you try multiple ones to see what works for you as well as your child. That could be yoga, progressive relaxation as you're tightening and loosening different muscles throughout your body in a very progressive way from head to toe. Aromatherapy can really work with folks, as can visualization as you're imagining being in a place that's very calm, whether that's a beach or a forest or something like that. Mindfulness, where you are in the present, where you are noticing the things around you, what the sounds are, all the sensual kinds of things that can really help ground you. Full breath. This is just one that I picked out, and I will share this PowerPoint with you so you could just click on it and go right to the website. But this actually talks you through all the different steps with mindful breathing that can help you relax. The other thing that you can do that helps anxiety with your child is to learn as much as you possibly can. That's why you're here, right? You want to learn, you want to help your child. So there are many, many wonderful resources that the National Association for Gifted Children has, and you can get primarily most of them on the website. I mentioned tip sheets. These are timely information for parents sheets. They are front and back. They have the main points of whatever it is you're dealing with. It will have Q&A, the typical questions that people have. It will have a list of resources and important things to do. They are free to you. I think we have over 20 now, and we still have some coming out all throughout the year. There is a book on the left that has the best of the magazine that's on the right. PHP is Parenting for High Potential. It comes out 4 times a year. And it has, the articles are typically just a couple of pages in length so that you can really, skim through them while you're in the line to pick up your child, while you're waiting at the doctor's office, that sort of thing. Well, in 2010, we put together the best of the best, and that's in the golden and blue book on the right. And then from 2010 to now, we put together all of the success strategies from PHP. You can buy those books from Amazon or from the NAGC bookstore. Parenting for High Potential only comes if you are a parent member. For $59, you can be a parent member of NAGC and you will get PHP 4 times a year, plus discounts on conferences and things like that. If you want, even if you're not a member, you can sign up for the news source that will be delivered to your inbox. And you typically can, just Google that. And like I said, you'll have the source here. You'll get lots of good information. We're on social media, of course. We have a new Engage system now on the website, and that allows parents, families, and communities to talk together. There are specific resources that are on there, and that is designed only for folks who are members. If you are Spanish speaking or you know of other Spanish speaking folks, we also have materials that are done in Spanish. And like I said, I'll send this to you so you can see lots of different things, but the print deals with some very interesting concepts. Perfectionism, we've got some books just with that. The misdiagnosis and dual diagnosis can deal with anxiety and lots of other things. I want to point out the top online one, and that's the Supporting Emotional Needs of the Gifted. SANG is an organization for gifted children, focusing, as it says, just on supporting emotional needs. You can go to their library, you click on it, you can click on perfectionism, and poof, there are 20 articles that you can read that are short and easy to understand. Now, I know that's a lot of information that I've thrown at you, but you've got my email there at the bottom. If you have any questions, if I can help with anything, please don't hesitate to contact me. And now comes the fun part for you, and that is you get to talk with teachers who really understand gifted children, as well as your fellow parents who are on the call. So thank you so much, Cheyenne, for having me, and I hope you have a very exciting, not anxious, but exciting breakout sessions.
Well, thank you so much to Dr. Inman for being here. And I put in the chat that I will be sending out these slides to you guys so that you will have all of those links and all of those resources that she shared. And like she mentioned, the NAGC is just an incredible resource for not only educators, but parents as well. So I hope you guys are able to get some of those resources. And again, thank you, Tracy. So we are going to do now, again, what you guys came for, and that's breakout rooms. You're going to get to talk to one another about your experiences. And so how it's going to work is I will pose a question for discussion, and this will just be a jumping off point from your rooms. If you get into your rooms and there's another conversation that you guys get off on, that's totally fine. We don't have to talk about whatever the discussion question is, but that's just a place for you guys to start. When you enter your room, you will have a facilitator, and they will introduce themselves. And from there, if you want to share your name and the grades of your children or just child in your school district and your location within the state, that would be really great. So everybody knows the context in which we're working. And then I'm just going to you're just going to have time to discuss and talk about your experiences, what's going on with your child, things that have worked, things have not worked. So we are going to do that now. Does anybody have any questions before we move forward? Great. So for our breakout rooms, just make sure that when you're not talking, your microphone is muted so that we're not getting a lot of background noise, and make sure everybody in your breakout room has a chance to speak. We're all here to talk, and this is a safe space. So please refrain from negative comments or sharing your experiences in a way that are respectful to school districts and staff and all the educators who are really trying their best to meet the needs of your students. And finally, don't be afraid to ask questions. The moderators that have been placed in your room are high ability teachers, administrators, or work with high ability students in some capacity. So they will be able to answer probably most of your questions. So, so moderators, I'm putting a lot of pressure on you guys to answer questions, but just don't be afraid to ask. So for our first breakout topic, I just want to talk about what's bringing us all together in common. What is something or some things that parents of non-HAL students don't understand? some things, what are some different things that, another family may think is normal, or that may not be a problem in their household, that would be a big deal in your life? What is it that you want to talk to other HAL parents about in terms of your experiences? And your moderator has these questions as well if you need them repeated, but I'm going to go ahead and open up breakout rooms for you guys. Maybe. Okay. I'm going to open them up. My moderators stay here and I will put you in your rooms automatically. All right, Melissa, you're actually in the correct room. Angie, you're in the correct room. Jennifer, you're in the correct room if you want to join.
Is something come up to tell us to join the room?
It should.
Not yet.
Did you not get it?
No.
Not
No,
yet.
ma'am.
Does it give you an option to join a breakout room if you hit breakout rooms?
We don't have breakout.
We don't
rooms
have
now.
that option.
Um,
Uh-oh.
Allow participants to choose room. Okay, I changed that. Can you now choose your room?
Not yet.
Open rooms.
Ah, there we go.
There we go.
Yeah.
We got it.
All right, choose, moderators choose the room that you're assigned, please.